She walked into the interview room, dressed sharper than anyone there. Her resume strong enough to lead a division. But before she could sit down, the HR director looked her dead in the eye, pointed to a coffee spill on the floor, and demanded she clean it up. No hesitation, no confusion, just the certainty that a black woman in a power suit must have taken a wrong turn. Around her, no one blinked. Security stepped closer. Other candidates whispered. The receptionist looked away. Not one person questioned the humiliation. They assumed it made sense. And that was their first mistake. Because while they laughed, dismissed, and condescended, they failed to ask one thing. What if the woman they were trying to erase wasn't who they thought she was? This isn't just about discrimination. It's about what happens when arrogance meets consequences. When a system designed to exclude gets caught in its own trap. What follows isn't revenge, it's precision. And no one in that building saw it coming. If you believe stories like this need to be seen and heard, hit like, subscribe for more truth beneath the surface, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and at what moment you would have stood up. Tasha Whitlow entered the lobby of Langford and Hawthorne Global with the posture of a woman who knew exactly what she brought to the table. Her stride was composed, deliberate, her steps echoing against the marble tiles with quiet confidence. She wore a tailored gray suit that framed her figure sharply, her blouse a soft pearl color tucked beneath a matching blazer. In her left hand, a leather-bound folio gripped tightly. Inside, copies of her resume, strategy mock-ups, and years of accomplishments printed on clean, cream paper. Her hair, pulled into a sleek twist, revealed diamond stud earrings that caught the morning light. She approached the front desk without hesitation, nodding to the receptionist before a voice halted her momentum. "Excuse me, miss." A security guard, white, heavy-set, early 40s with a shaved head and flat eyes, stepped in front of her path. No warmth in his tone, no attempt at civility. Deliveries used the side entrance. Tasha blinked once, then tilted her head, her voice composed. "I'm here for the 9 o'clock interview, executive brand strategist." She didn't raise her tone, didn't waver. The guard didn't move. His eyes dropped to her shoes, then climbed slowly back to her face. "Janitorial access is at the loading dock," he said flatly. Her suit, her watch, the quality of her bag, none of it registered. None of it mattered. To him, she didn't belong here. Tasha inhaled slowly, keeping her expression neutral. This wasn't the first time, but it was no less galling. Just then, the elevator doors opened, and a woman strode out like she owned the building. Meredith Doyle, Director of Human Resources, wearing a black fitted dress and holding a sleek digital tablet. Her heels clicked against the tile, each step sharp and assured. She barely looked at Tasha before glancing at the security guard. "Coffee spill," she said, gesturing toward a dark stain near the corner by the waiting chairs. "Can you have her clean it before the candidates arrive?" Meredith's eyes swept back to Tasha, squinting slightly. That quick flick of dismissiveness, a nonverbal decision made in half a second. Tasha didn't move. Meredith tilted her head. "Well," she said, not with anger, but with something worse, expectation. That strange, subtle command baked into people who have never been told no. Tasha raised her folio slightly, revealing the gold-embossed letters on the front. Tasha Whitlow, MBA. Meredith squinted again, this time with a touch of confusion. She looked at the interview list on her tablet. There it was. The name. Her expression froze. "Oh," she said finally, flat and faint. Then came the slight smirk. "I didn't realize you were here for that." The pause between words was deliberate. That meant the executive interview, the upper floor, the glass-walled offices. She turned on a heel and began to walk away. "Conference room C. You can wait upstairs," she said without looking back. No apology. No acknowledgement of what just happened. Just a command disguised as instruction. Tasha didn't speak. She walked past the guard, who now stood still, awkward and silent. The elevator dinged. Inside were 2 men in suits, mid-30s, white, laughing quietly about something on a phone. Their laughter paused when they noticed her. They stepped aside, but didn't speak. The ride up was silent. The doors opened to the 32nd floor, where modern art adorned the walls, and the receptionist had a voice like a radio host. She looked up at Tasha, forced a tight smile, and said nothing. No welcome. No words. Just a thin veneer of politeness. Tasha gave her name. The receptionist typed, squinted, then finally nodded and pointed to the glass seating area. Already, 2 of the other candidates were seated. Men, confident, sipping espresso from tiny porcelain cups. One of them looked at Tasha, then at her folder, then at the receptionist. He leaned toward his peer and muttered something. The other one chuckled. She caught every syllable. She's probably logistics, he said under his breath. Tasha sat, placing her folder on her lap. Her fingers remained still, but inside, her pulse ticked upward. She adjusted her wristwatch. 9:07. Behind the glass, Meredith appeared again. She looked at the candidates, her eyes gliding over Tasha with calculated disinterest. She tapped her tablet. We'll begin with Trevor, Brandon, and Cole, she announced, turning before Tasha could speak. The others stood. Tasha did not. She waited. She counted each second until Meredith returned. When she did, Tasha rose. I was scheduled at 9, she said. Meredith paused, looked at her like someone who'd found a typo on a menu. There's been a reshuffle, she said lightly. Meredith didn't greet Tasha with the enthusiasm or respect she had offered the previous candidates. No eye contact, no handshake, no small talk. Instead, she adjusted her dress, set down a company-branded tablet, and tapped it a few times with a single finger. Tasha watched her, reading the calculation behind every movement. The silence stretched, not by accident but design, and when Meredith finally looked up, her smile was thin and mechanical. Let's begin, she said, without emotion. Tasha introduced herself, offered a concise background summary, recited numbers, results, and strategic pivots she had led. Her voice was clear, steady, polished by years of high-stakes pitches and boardroom battles. But Meredith didn't seem to be listening. She nodded through key achievements with a blank expression, occasionally glancing at Clark, who sat quietly, typing furiously into his laptop. Then the tone shifted. Meredith crossed her legs, leaned back slightly in her chair, and narrowed her gaze as if settling into a more personal inspection. Tell me, Tasha, how do you think your background has prepared you to operate in a culture of high-level expectations? The question was phrased to sound neutral, but the edge behind it was unmistakable. Tasha answered evenly, referencing her years in data-driven rebranding, her executive roles, her track record under pressure. Meredith nodded slowly, but with the kind of smile people use when pretending to listen. Then came the second question. How do you handle environments where the communication style may differ significantly from your own? Tasha didn't blink. She had heard that one before. Coded language, thinly veiled suspicion that her tone, her voice, her identity might disrupt the so-called culture. She responded with professionalism, highlighting emotional intelligence, collaborative wins, conflict resolution examples. But it was clear Meredith was not interested in skills. She was hunting for discomfort, for weakness. Do you find it challenging to adapt when your leadership style doesn't reflect that of the dominant environment? Tasha tilted her head slightly. She knew this game. She had seen it played before, questions that didn't question capability, but identity, questions that tested whether she could be molded or would need to be tolerated. Clark kept typing, though his eyes briefly flicked toward Tasha, something uncertain in his expression. Meredith moved on. We value cohesion over confrontation. Would you describe yourself as someone who can adjust even when your perspective isn't shared? Tasha's response was poised, even if the insult beneath the question simmered. She knew what Meredith meant. Don't challenge. Don't stand out. Don't be too much. Don't be you. The rest of the interview unfolded in a similar rhythm. Questions cloaked in neutrality, but sharpened by assumption. Not once did Meredith ask about revenue streams, campaign strategy, market positioning, or leadership metrics. She never even referenced the portfolio Tasha had submitted. Instead, she pivoted toward hypotheticals rooted in behavior, in soft skill ambiguity, designed to trap rather than illuminate. At one point, she asked Tasha how she handled being misunderstood, and whether she ever felt her assertiveness came off as aggressive. It wasn't even subtle. Tasha met every question with grace, every trap with clarity, every challenge with facts. But she knew. She knew before the interview ended that this seat wasn't hers. Not because she wasn't qualified, but because the outcome had already been decided long before she walked into that room. When Meredith finally stood, she offered a thank you that rang hollow. "We'll be in touch," she said. But the way her eyes avoided Tasha's confirmed that they would not. Clark gave a polite nod, but his face was tight with something, shame, maybe, or discomfort. Tasha walked out, shoulders square, heels clicking softly across the corridor tiles. She didn't stop at the receptionist desk. She didn't pause in the lounge. She stepped into the elevator, let the doors close behind her, and didn't look back. Upstairs, Meredith tossed Tasha's printed resume onto the corner of the desk, the glossy pages sliding across the glass. She didn't review them. She didn't store them. She picked them up, flipped through the cover letter, and raised her brow. "Ambitious," she muttered to Clark, the first sign of amusement curling her lips. "She thinks this seat is for people like her?" Clark didn't respond. He stared at the screen in front of him, unsure of whether to laugh or stay silent. Meredith ripped the pages in half, then into quarters, the sound crisp and deliberate. She dropped the shreds into the trash bin beside her and reached for her phone. "Let's bring in Nolan next. I like his energy." Clark hesitated, but said nothing. Meredith glanced at him, sensing his unease. "Don't be naive, Clark. We both know who plays well in this space." She smiled. She meant men like Nolan, white, affable, average but confident. Clark nodded slowly and tapped out a message to the next candidate. Meanwhile, in the parking garage below, Tasha sat in her car, hands on the wheel, her face unreadable. Her phone rested beside her, buzzing once with a new notification. She didn't reach for it. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds. When she opened them, her expression was sharper, colder. She walked with deliberate calm, heels soft on the polished tile, her shoulder bag tucked beneath her arm as she approached the front desk. The receptionist, a woman named Lauren, offered her a tight-lipped smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Hi," Tasha said evenly. "I was told to wait for any follow-up paperwork." Lauren glanced at her screen, tapped a few keys, then looked back up with a vague expression of confusion. "Actually, it looks like you've been cleared. No follow-up needed. You can wait in the general seating area just outside." Her finger pointed not to the sleek executive lounge inside the secured glass door, where espresso machines hissed and soft music played beneath warm lighting, but to a hard bench beneath a wall-mounted security camera across from the elevators. "Internal access is restricted," Lauren added quickly, as though reading from a policy manual. "Standard protocol." Tasha didn't flinch. She gave a single nod and moved to the cold hallway outside the lounge. She sat without comment, folding her arms lightly across her lap, every inch of her posture still composed, still firm, still dignified. Just inside the glass, 3 of the white male candidates she had seen earlier were now gathered around a refreshment station, chatting, sipping from porcelain cups, reviewing interview packets with branded folders and embossed names. One of them laughed, threw his head back in easy amusement. Another leaned toward an HR assistant, who touched his arm in that casual, privileged way reserved for those deemed already part of the family. None of them glanced in her direction. Tasha didn't stare. She simply watched with the stillness of someone used to collecting detail, someone used to existing outside the narrative while quietly writing her own. 15 feet away, near the corner office copier, a young woman hovered beside a tray of paperwork. Her name tag read Riley. She was 23, in her second month of internship, and trying too hard to look like she belonged. Her blazer was slightly too large, her heels half a size too small. She wore hope like perfume, visible, persistent, and maybe a little naive. Riley gathered a small stack of freshly printed documents and placed them neatly into file sleeves marked Talent Pool Tier 2. As she flipped through the top sheet, her eyes paused. One page was covered in red markup, highlighted lines, all caps notes, and a yellow sticky tab that read Defer/Flag Profile doesn't align. The name at the top read Whitlow, Tasha. Riley blinked. The printed note on the margin read, "Candidate lacks cultural fit for current leadership tone." Another line, "May not integrate smoothly with existing brand image." And beneath that, a final remark in bold font, "Standard redirect for diversity-driven applicants keep on file, reserved for external outreach programs." Riley's hands froze. She glanced around, as if she'd stumbled on something forbidden. The hallway behind her was empty. No one noticed. No one looked. Her eyes flicked toward the security camera above, then toward the closed lounge door, then toward Tasha. For a second, their eyes met. Tasha didn't know what the intern had seen, but she could tell from the girl's face that something had shifted. The sudden tightness in her mouth, the way her hands hovered uncertainly over the folder, not sure whether to hide it or deliver it. Riley cleared her throat and turned away. Her shoes made no sound as she slipped back into the operations corridor. Inside the lounge, Meredith entered from the opposite side, laughing with a junior partner, both holding matching lattes. She passed the gathered candidates, paused briefly at one, and complimented the fit of his blazer. "Sharp look," she said, tapping his shoulder lightly. Then she turned, saw Tasha through the glass, and her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look concerned. She looked like someone who had expected to see exactly that. Tasha on the bench, separated, isolated, waiting outside something she wasn't meant to be part of. Tasha met her gaze. A long moment passed. Meredith broke eye contact first. She turned back into the lounge, laughing again, louder now. Behind the reception desk, Lauren pulled up the day's internal appointment memo. One line caught her eye. It had been added just an hour earlier. Whitlow external contact pool only. Do not advance without clearance. The note had no signature, but Lauren recognized the tone. It was how Meredith marked the names of people she didn't want inside. People who checked the boxes but didn't fit the aesthetic. Tasha didn't move from her seat. She took out her notebook again. She made 2 new entries. 1. Candidate access lounge denied. 2. Printed tier 2 directive cited. She didn't record names yet. Her fingers clutched the small printout in her folder, her official callback notice for the final round, signed and time-stamped with the Langford and Hawthorne seal. Despite everything that had happened in the waiting lounge downstairs, despite the unspoken dismissal and the paper-thin excuses for her exclusion, she had been summoned. She had made the cut, at least on paper. That paper, however, would not be enough. As she approached the double doors marked C-Suite Access Only, a tall man in an ill-fitting charcoal blazer stepped out from the adjacent corridor. He held a clipboard in one hand and a walkie-talkie in the other. His badge identified him as Bradley Kessler, Operations Manager. His jaw tensed the moment he saw her approaching. His eyes narrowed as if trying to place her. There was no recognition in his expression, only skepticism. His posture shifted automatically into a blocking stance. She knew it before he said a word. He saw a problem, not a person. Bradley raised a hand to stop her, voice clipped, tone managerial. He asked where she was going, demanded clarification, as though the printout in her hand weren't already an answer. Tasha responded calmly, offered her ID, her name, her appointment sheet, explained she was scheduled for the 10:30 with the Strategic Alignment Committee in room 44A. He didn't even look at the paper. He glanced at her suit, at her skin, then back at her eyes with a look that said the credentials didn't matter. What mattered was the gut feeling he had that she wasn't supposed to be there. He asked her to wait. When she clarified again that she was on the list, that she had already checked in and been directed to the correct floor, he interrupted her with a rehearsed apology. He explained that due to sensitive meetings and VIP security protocols, the company had recently updated floor access procedures. He gestured toward a smaller conference alcove around the corner. He said she'd be asked to wait there for the time being, until her eligibility was re-verified. He used the word calmly, like it was just another checkbox to tick, as though denying her entry was a neutral procedure and not another deliberate wall erected to stall her progress. Tasha looked toward the glass conference doors ahead, already partially open. Inside, she could see two other candidates, both men, both white, seated across a large round table with coffee in hand and portfolios already opened. They weren't being asked to verify anything. No one had stopped them. No one had redirected them. Bradley had let them pass without hesitation. She knew it. He knew it. But the rules, in his version of this system, only applied when convenient, or when uncomfortable. She stood her ground and presented the document again, this time more firmly, pointing to the timestamp. She asked him if he planned to delay the interview panel by detaining a scheduled participant. He hesitated. He didn't expect her to press back. He wasn't used to being questioned by someone who looked like her. His hand twitched on the walkie-talkie. He muttered something about calling upstairs. Then, after an awkward silence, he stepped aside. But the damage was already done. Inside the conference room, as Tasha entered and greeted the panel with cool precision, she saw the shift immediately. The way the men looked up, the exchange of brief glances, the flicker of amusement behind one of their smirks. They had seen what happened through the glass. They had seen her stopped. Her authority had been challenged before she had even opened her mouth. It was a performance for them, and now the opening act had already framed the next scene. The senior interviewer, a man with silver hair and a navy tie, gave a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He told her to have a seat, but there was an edge to his politeness, like it had been dulled from disuse. He asked her to walk through her strategy proposal. She did flawlessly, precisely, integrating market analytics, customer persona pivots, and projected KPI increases. But as she spoke, she could sense their interest drifting. One man glanced at his phone. Another looked at his notes, but didn't write anything. A third asked a question about team culture expectations and adaptive behavior under legacy models. She answered. They didn't nod. By the time the interview ended, Tasha's performance had been airtight, but the room remained cool, unmoved, unaffected. The lead interviewer thanked her in a voice too flat to be genuine and said they'd be in touch within the week. No handshakes followed. No follow-up questions. She stood, offered a polite thank you, and left without looking back. Out in the hallway, Bradley was gone. The lounge doors were closed. Her name had already begun fading from their memories. Downstairs, at the operations desk, Riley hovered again at the printer, another stack of confidential documents in hand. This time, a printed internal chat log sat near the top. A Slack thread from Meredith to 3 other HR leads. It read, "Heads up, Whitlow is persistent. Made it to final round. Kessler tried to block her. Be ready in case she escalates. Will spin as process confusion if needed." Riley stared at the screen. Her jaw tightened. She printed a copy and slid it silently into her own folder. She no longer had doubt. Down the hall, laughter echoed, slow and loud, accompanied by the deliberate thud of heavy Oxfords against marble tile. A man rounded the corner, tall, barrel-chested, early 60s, white hair swept back, Rolex peeking from beneath a custom-tailored cuff. He carried a sense of ownership with him, the kind that came not from achievement, but from long-standing, unquestioned authority. His name badge read Wallace Granger, Senior Executive Vice President, Global Markets. He didn't notice her at first, but when he did, he stopped mid-stride, his brows lifting in vague recognition, or rather, vague discomfort. He scanned her appearance quickly, took in the neutral suit, the quiet stillness, and made a decision. His lips curled upward in amusement. He gestured casually toward the hallway floor behind her and said, "Early shift today?" Tasha didn't react. She didn't answer. She didn't smile. He interpreted her silence as confusion. He pointed again, this time laughing a little louder. "No cart? No mop." He chuckled, waiting for her to join the joke. She did not. Moments later, an assistant approached from behind, clipboard in hand. The young woman greeted Granger with practiced reverence, then turned to Tasha with surprise. "Oh, you're still here. Mr. Granger, this is Tasha Whitlow. She's one of the finalists for the brand strategist director role." The air shifted instantly. The chuckle died in Granger's throat. He blinked twice, the kind of blink people do when their worldview hit static. He tilted his head, recalibrating. Then, instead of apologizing, he laughed harder. Not out of embarrassment, but disbelief. "You're joking," he said to the assistant. She shook her head awkwardly. He looked at Tasha again, eyes squinting as if trying to read something hidden behind her expression. "You're telling me she's applying for the director role?" His tone carried equal parts amusement and insult. "That's a serious seat," he added. "We're talking about a high-profile portfolio, multi-region oversight, legacy accounts. That position's not for—" He stopped short. But the implication lingered like a fingerprint on glass. "Not for people like you." Tasha didn't answer. She stood still, watching him, unmoved. Granger shrugged, as if brushing off his own comment. "Hey, maybe I'm out of touch," he said with a smile that wasn't friendly. "These days, anyone can be anything, right?" Then he turned to the assistant and murmured something about DI overcorrection and optics hires, loud enough for her to hear. She caught every syllable. Tasha looked at the assistant, who avoided eye contact, her posture shrinking. Granger walked past them, still smiling, still chuckling to himself, and disappeared into the glass doors of the board wing. Inside the HR office 2 floors up, Meredith sat at her desk with a coffee mug in one hand and a message thread open on her tablet. A new notification pinged from Wallace Granger. "LOL, saw your wild card candidate. This one's a stretch. Not sure what committee was thinking. Hope they're not serious." Meredith tapped a quick reply. "No worries. We're handling it. Her profile will be redirected." Beneath that thread, another chain had begun forming. A quiet thread among mid-level managers who had been tracking the final candidate list. It read, "Note, Whitlow external friendly, internal no." Someone had already flagged her application for the recruiting archive. Soft filter, no progression. Just like that, her candidacy had begun to vanish behind screens and silent commands. No explanation, no appeal, just deletion through protocol, the kind that leaves no fingerprints. Back in the corridor, Tasha remained exactly where she had been. The assistant had since disappeared, leaving her to wait again in the alcove, alone, surrounded by frosted glass, chrome rails, and the quiet hum of a ventilation system designed to be felt but not heard. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. She didn't need reminders. Everything she needed to remember was playing out in real time. She took out her notebook again, added 3 entries. Gange Interaktion 10:57 Uhr morgens. Misidentified as custodial. Reaction to title derisive. Next, language used not for. These days, anyone can be anything. And finally, Meredith/Granger connection confirmed. Pattern, now, extends to executive level. She closed the notebook softly, placed it back in her folder, and looked again at her own faint reflection in the window. She didn't feel rage. Not yet. She felt calculation. She felt momentum. In the IT department 1 floor below, Riley sat frozen at her desk, the Slack thread still glowing on her screen. She had seen the Granger message come in. She had watched as Meredith responded. She had seen the tag added to Tasha's profile. She minimized the window, opened the employee handbook, searched for whistleblower protocol, and clicked twice before stopping. Her hand hovered over the mouse. She thought of Tasha, of how composed she looked even while being erased in real time. She thought of how the room always turned colder when someone like her walked in. She didn't know what she would do yet, but she knew she could no longer pretend not to see it. A few floors below, in the glass-enclosed hub of talent acquisition strategy, an intern named Jonah sat hunched in front of a wall of monitors, reviewing application routing logs for the past quarter. His job was to flag inconsistencies in algorithmic decisions, cases where the autosort software placed profiles in the wrong track, or where resume parsing missed key data. The software, a proprietary tool called FilterFrame, had been touted in internal presentations as a breakthrough, capable of increasing hiring efficiency by 90%. But Jonah had started to notice something off. He ran a query, filtered by zip code origin, and stared as the results populated. A pattern emerged. candidates from specific zip codes, those primarily linked to urban districts with majority black populations, had an 82% chance of being rerouted into a non-advancement pool labeled Community Engagement Opportunities, regardless of skill alignment. The tag used was Fit Deviation. It sounded benign. It wasn't. He clicked into a file. Whitlow Tasha. He remembered the name from the printed reports he'd helped organize that morning. Her resume had been marked top tier by the initial scoring system. Score 94.7. Comparative percentile. First among the final 5 candidates. But a second system had appended a note post-review. Cultural alignment check recommended. Her file had been tagged with tone adjustment suggested and flagged for DI reassignment. Jonah frowned. That tag wasn't part of the official scoring rubric. It wasn't in the training material. It was something added manually, but it appeared automatically in multiple cases, always attached to the same types of profiles. In the Slack group for recruitment oversight, a message thread pinged. Need quick alignment on Whitlow file. Meredith wants to ensure final evaluation references the cultural sync metric. We can't have misalignment at leadership levels. Jonah read it twice. Cultural sync metric was not an HR standard. It was code. He minimized the thread and opened the dashboard logs for the evaluation panel. Each interviewer had entered a post-meeting score. For Tasha, the breakdown was baffling. Technical knowledge, 10 tenths. Strategic insight, 10 tenths. Presentation skill, 9 out of 10. But under organizational integration, she had received a 4. One line explained the deduction. Tone may disrupt team cohesion. Lacks shared language. He sat back in his chair, stunned by the coldness of it. Meanwhile, in the break room off the East Wing, 2 managers chatted over half-empty coffee cups. Their conversation circled back to the morning interviews. One leaned in, his voice hushed but confident. You see the one in the gray suit? Impressive on paper, but off. Couldn't see her running a legacy team here. The other nodded. Too sharp. Like she's always calculating. Doesn't feel like someone who'd go grab drinks with the team after hours. They sipped, smirked, and moved on to another topic. Back upstairs, Riley sat at her desk again, this time with a full HR evaluation sheet opened in front of her. She had requested access under the pretense of gathering material for the post-recruitment debrief. What she found turned her stomach. There was a secondary folder hidden behind a generic code label, where profiles like Tasha's were quietly redirected once they passed the initial score thresholds. The folder was titled Integration Flex Candidates. In it, every profile belonged to a person of color. Every profile had near-perfect scores. Every profile had been removed from advancement. And every single one had been tagged Hold for community visibility or external partner roles. It was a shadow filter, one designed not to evaluate, but to isolate. She clicked on a comment embedded in Tasha's file. High presence factor. Potential authority tension. May be perceived as inflexible in legacy structures. The words weren't just insulting. They were strategic, designed to justify exclusion while appearing thoughtful. Riley's hands hovered over the keyboard. She knew what she was seeing. She also knew what it meant to bring it forward. The last intern who raised a question about filter frame sorting biases had quietly been reassigned to a vendor-facing documentation role and disappeared from internal threads a week later. Tasha, still waiting in the compliance lounge, received a notification. Her applicant status had changed. The screen read, "Thank you for your time. We have moved forward with another candidate whose profile more closely aligns with our team's evolving needs." No call, no debrief, just disappearance. Her hands remained still. Her face gave nothing away. She had expected this. But now she had confirmation. Down in the talent lab, Jonah finally took a screenshot of the query results and saved them in a private folder. He didn't yet know who he would send them to, but he knew he couldn't delete them. Above him, Riley opened a draft email, typed a few lines, deleted them, typed again. She glanced at the Slack thread, now active again with celebration emojis for the selected candidate, Nolan Carver. Average scores. Below benchmark on strategy. but white, charming, and enthusiastic. His file had one comment: strong cultural match, easy to place in legacy teams. Her hand reached lazily for her cup of lukewarm coffee as she stood and straightened the hem of her blazer, the kind of movement people make when they believe the day is over, the outcome sealed. Downstairs, in the elevator lobby, Tasha stood in the same calm posture she had worn all day, but something in her eyes had changed. The silence around her wasn't passive, it was coiled. In her left hand, she held her phone with the screen dimmed. In her right, her leather folio now closed not as a symbol of readiness, but as a final act of documentation. She had recorded enough. She had observed long enough. She had waited long enough. The elevator pinged softly, and the doors opened to reveal Meredith, stepping out with her usual brisk stride, unaware that the routine rhythm of dismissal she'd orchestrated would not continue as expected. As she passed by, Tasha stepped forward with quiet precision, intercepting her path without raising her voice, without announcing intent. Her phone was already unlocked. She opened a video conferencing app and initiated a secure boardroom connection with a single tap. The signal pulsed for only 2 seconds before a high-resolution feed flickered to life on her screen, revealing a large, wood-paneled executive office with an emblem mounted behind a broad mahogany desk. A man appeared on the screen, early 50s, sharp suit, trimmed beard, eyes like flint. The caption under his name read, "A Langford Global Chair, LHG Strategy Division." His voice filled the corridor through the phone speaker. "Tasha, are you in position?" Meredith stopped walking. The blood in her face seemed to drain all at once. Her eyes darted to the screen, and then to Tasha, then back again, and her lips parted slightly, not in recognition, but in disbelief. Tasha turned the screen slightly, allowing the man's gaze to land directly on Meredith. "Is that Doyle?" he asked. "We've been waiting for her office to file the final compliance report." Meredith stammered, not with words but with breath. She tried to smile, but her face had gone stiff. Her voice, when it came, lacked its usual command. I wasn't aware this meeting was scheduled," she managed to say. "No one briefed me that." Her words faltered again. The man on the screen leaned forward. "You weren't briefed because this isn't a public-facing review. This is internal strategy oversight. Tasha leads our market recalibration initiative. She's here to observe structural integrity within our executive recruitment systems." He paused. "From what I've seen so far, I'd say the structure needs rethinking." Meredith looked at Tasha, but Tasha's gaze didn't shift. It remained fixed, and even no triumph in it, no vengeance, just clarity. The kind of clarity that comes from knowing you never needed to raise your voice to be heard. You just needed to choose the right moment to speak. Behind them, 2 assistants stood frozen near a print station. One whispered, "Did he say she leads strategy?" The other nodded, eyes wide. Word began to ripple, not with panic yet, but with that sharp, metallic buzz that spreads before a fire alarm rings. The screen shifted again, and 2 more names joined the call: Lana Mendez, VP of Global Policy, and Victor Mahoney, Chief Ethics Officer. Their presence confirmed this was no ordinary check-in. This was oversight. This was internal audit. Victor spoke first. "We've reviewed several flagged behaviors today. Everything from access denial to filtration tagging under non-compliant policy codes." His voice was flat, surgical. "MS. Whitlow has provided us with timestamps, logs, and corroborating statements. She was authorized to document anonymously. Her appointment as internal equity auditor was confirmed by the board 2 months ago." Meredith's knees stiffened. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, then crossed her arms like armor. "We never received that communication," she said. "No one informed us of her position." Victor didn't flinch. That was intentional. The observation needed to be untainted. Lana added, "What you just confirmed is that your system was fully operational under bias, even when not under scrutiny." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Tasha did not speak during the entire exchange. She didn't have to. Her presence was the message. Every room she had entered, every corridor where she had been overlooked, every glance, every laugh, every slight, it all collapsed under the weight of institutional accountability, now pressing down through live oversight from the highest level of leadership. Meredith stepped back. Her face was now flush. Her voice shrank. She whispered, I need to get my supervisor. But she knew. She already knew. The faces on the screen did not blink. They waited. Tasha finally spoke. Her tone was calm, deliberate. No need. I'll be forwarding a complete report with all supplementary documents by this evening. I'll also be scheduling compliance remediation meetings with each department flagged in the chain: HR, talent acquisition, executive review, and policy integration. She paused. We'll begin with this office. A final message arrived in her inbox as the call ended. An encrypted link from the Office of Global Ethics. Tasha tapped it once, saved the access key, then powered off her phone. Inside, several seats were already filled by division heads, audit managers, and compliance officers, all summoned within the hour. None of them informed of the reason behind the urgency, only that the chair and the ethics chief had personally requested immediate attendance. Meredith sat near the wall, not the table but along the periphery, placed deliberately among the observers rather than the decision-makers. Her posture tightened and folded inward like someone who understood, finally, that the silence she had imposed on others would no longer protect her. Tasha entered with purpose, her pace controlled, her steps measured. She set her folio on the table without drama, opened it, and removed a small device, a wireless transmitter that linked seamlessly to the integrated boardroom audio system. She tapped a button, and the room filled instantly with crisp playback. Meredith's voice emerged first, clear and sharp, asking a question dressed in coded language. Would you describe yourself as someone who can adjust even when your perspective doesn't align with legacy expectations? Then came Tasha's response, steady and professional. The recording progressed through the full exchange, tone-shaded queries, leading assumptions, the withholding of feedback, and the final dismissal delivered with calculated detachment. No one interrupted the playback. No one looked away. When it ended, Tasha tapped once more and projected the summary log across the smart glass display behind her. The screen populated with 3 columns: candidate performance metrics, interview panel scores, and tag-based filter results. Her score led in every quantifiable area. And yet, in the 3rd column, the entries flashed like warnings: tone flagged, external fit only, cultural misalignment risk. A murmur swept the room. Tasha didn't turn toward it. From the far end of the table, the company's lead legal advisor, Martin Cates, stood and addressed the room. His voice was calm but carried weight. Effective immediately, he said, Langford and Hawthorne Global will initiate a full-scale internal investigation into discriminatory practices within its executive hiring systems. Based on preliminary findings and corroborated documentation, we have reason to believe systemic bias has been embedded into both human and algorithmic channels of talent evaluation. He turned toward Meredith, whose face had drained of all color. Ms. Doyle, you are hereby placed under administrative review. Your access to internal systems is suspended until further notice. She tried to speak, but the weight of the words that had just been played aloud rendered her arguments obsolete before they could form. Tasha watched her, not with satisfaction, but with absolute certainty. She had not come here for revenge. She had come for correction, and it was already beginning. Martin continued. We are also placing Filter Frame's application routing tool under audit. All candidates flagged within the last 12 months under community visibility pools will be reviewed by a third-party compliance board. Legal counsel will be made available to all impacted parties. Around the table, heads nodded slowly. One woman leaned forward, saying, "This could impact our federal funding qualifications." Another murmured, "It's not just about funding. This affects the foundation of our brand." Tasha let them speak. She had already prepared the roadmap for what came next. It sat inside her encrypted drive, which she now connected to the board system. A new slide appeared. Phase 1 Restorative Review Plan. Phase 2 Accountability Restructure. Phase 3 Transparent Recruitment Architecture. Each phase was backed by data, by recorded patterns, by policy failures mapped against outcome disparities. As she presented, not a single person interrupted. Even those who had never seen her before today understood that authority did not come from volume or title. It came from clarity, from proof, from the quiet patience of someone who had walked through fire and still emerged unburned. She ended the presentation with a single question projected behind her in bold text. How many were lost because no one was watching? No one answered. In the back of the room, Riley stood near the wall, her badge now clipped higher on her blazer. She had submitted the internal Slack transcripts that morning, attaching them anonymously to Tasha's archive. She knew her identity wouldn't remain hidden for long, but it didn't matter anymore. She had chosen, and seeing Tasha now unshaken, unmoved, undeniable, confirmed that she had chosen right. Meredith remained seated, her hands clasped, her eyes staring at the floor. Around her, the space that had once made her feel untouchable had turned cold. Her name was no longer followed by nods, but by questions. Her authority had become a relic, a memory of when silence was safety. Now, silence was evidence. The board dismissed the session, not with applause, not with formalities, just the sharp click of chairs being pushed back and pens sliding into pockets. Tasha packed her folder, nodded to Martin, and turned to leave. Meredith lifted her head slightly, perhaps expecting a look, a final exchange. But Tasha didn't turn. Meredith Doyle is no longer employed by Langford and Hawthorne Global. An external audit of all executive hiring practices over the past 5 fiscal years will begin today. All staff are required to comply fully with requests from the appointed audit team. Failure to cooperate will result in disciplinary review. In the HR wing, where Meredith had once ruled with poise and calculated indifference, her glass-walled corner office now sat hollow. The lights off, the air still. A single white envelope rested on the edge of her desk, with the words "Access Terminated" typed in bold. Her keycard had been revoked before dawn. Her system credentials were erased, her inbox archived, and a replacement nameplate was already being slid into place. The staff who had once echoed her laughter now spoke in hushed tones. Some avoided eye contact with one another entirely, as though the realization of complicity had only just become unbearable. Meanwhile, the digital forensics team moved swiftly through the building. Dressed in navy blazers, silent, clinical, and efficient, they entered each floor with portable audit terminals, extracting recruitment histories, Slack logs, system access chains, and interview panel scoring archives. At least a dozen employees were pulled into private review rooms before noon. The team uncovered patterns far worse than even Tasha's audit had predicted. Over 60 high-scoring applicants, predominantly Black and Latings professionals, had been systematically redirected into alternative opportunity pools, despite meeting or exceeding all qualifications. The justification tags used against them ranged from vague behavioral assumptions to flatly inappropriate cultural commentary. Phrases like "tone not suitable," "presence too authoritative," and "could be difficult to manage" appeared repeatedly. The tags weren't anomalies. They were protocol. In the communication suite, the Director of Public Affairs stood pale before a wall-sized monitor where the crisis PR team was drafting a public response. They knew the press would break the story within the hour. Tasha's appointment had been confidential, but the results of her audit were already being felt by regional leadership. The company's stock dipped 6 points by midday. Social media chatter surged as screenshots leaked from anonymous sources, exposing parts of the internal messaging that had informed Tasha's demotion. One image, a Slack exchange between Meredith and another executive stating, "Don't let this one pass the optics filter," trended globally under the hashtag #BiasUnfiltered. At headquarters of the parent conglomerate, the reaction was swift and cold. The Board of International Oversight convened an emergency meeting and passed a motion of direct intervention. That afternoon, a press conference was held. A spokesperson appeared before a dozen microphones, delivering the prepared statement with measured authority. Langford and Hawthorne Global has violated both the ethical standards and operational guidelines expected of a subsidiary under our name. We are launching a full independent investigation. Accountability will be absolute. We are committed to structural correction, legal compliance, and a redress framework for all impacted individuals. No one was named, but everyone knew. Back inside the office, the ripple effects spread outward. Department heads who had relied on Meredith's recruitment model began to question whether their teams, their culture, their output were ever the result of merit or simply manufactured homogeneity. Panels were suspended. Promotion recommendations were frozen. Budgets earmarked for branding initiatives were reallocated to training, remediation, and legal review. One executive who had chaired multiple hiring cycles voluntarily stepped down. Another attempted to resign, but was told to remain under review until cleared. Entire pipelines were scrubbed of bias tags. But it was too late to erase the damage. Applicants who had been dismissed months ago were now being contacted, their cases reopened, their rejections acknowledged. Some responded with outrage, others with disbelief, all of them with clarity. They hadn't failed. They had been filtered. Meanwhile, Meredith sat inside a rented conference room at a business center downtown. She stared at a stack of legal documents placed before her by her counsel, none of which could be shredded by spin. The separation letter was firm. Her severance package, once considered generous, had been suspended pending the outcome of civil liability reviews. Her professional license through the HR Executive Consortium had been placed under inquiry. She knew it wasn't just about losing the job. It was about becoming the face of something larger than herself, a system whose rules she hadn't written, but had gladly enforced. Her former allies no longer returned her calls. Her name, once whispered with admiration in backdoor meetings, now surfaced only in legal memos and ethics training outlines. She reviewed her notes again, as if some detail might excuse the decisions. But no justification remained. Elsewhere, the Office of Federal Workplace Equity issued a notice of compliance evaluation to Langford and Hawthorne, listing the company as a subject of Title VII review. This announcement triggered a second, wider wave of scrutiny across similar firms using the same hiring software. The tool FilterFrame was now under federal audit. Other companies quietly began pulling it from their systems before reporters could trace the license trail. Months passed, and the storm that had shaken Langford and Hawthorne began to settle, not into silence, but into a new kind of order, one defined not by appearances, but by accountability. The offices that once echoed with quiet exclusion were now filled with unfamiliar but necessary conversations. Diversity committees that had once been ornamental were now core to strategic planning. Training sessions that had been optional became mandatory, immersive, and led by external educators who demanded truth over optics. And while policies changed and structures adapted, the deeper transformation unfolded not in boardrooms, but in the quiet corners of personal reckoning. Meredith Doyle no longer worked in skyscrapers or reviewed portfolios behind tinted glass. She volunteered now 3 times a week at the Crestview Community Center on the east side, where fluorescent lights flickered above a narrow hallway lined with motivational posters and worn carpet. She started with clerical work, filing intake forms, organizing pantry donations, handing out hygiene kits, and spoke little during her first weeks. The people who passed her by each day didn't know her past, only her presence. She didn't offer explanations. She didn't give speeches. She just showed up, and somewhere between the 2 p.m. sorting shift and the 6 p.m. meal prep line, something inside her began to change, not in guilt, but in understanding. The center's founder, a woman named Lydia, eventually invited her to sit in on a town hall event being hosted by the center's largest benefactor, a local strategist turned equity consultant. The name on the flyer was Tasha Whitlow. Meredith hesitated. She had not seen or spoken to Tasha since the day her badge was deactivated. She had read every article, watched every press appearance, and witnessed from a distance how the woman she once dismissed had become a national voice for change. She expected anger, confrontation, or cold indifference. What she didn't expect was eye contact, a simple, steady look across a crowded room when Tasha stepped to the podium and began her remarks. That look didn't offer comfort or forgiveness. It offered truth. After the event ended and chairs began scraping against linoleum, Meredith approached slowly, uncertain whether her words would mean anything, whether her presence would even be permitted. She introduced herself with a quiet, trembling voice. Tasha nodded once. Meredith's throat tightened as she whispered, "I spent 17 years thinking I was good at my job. But what I was good at was being protected. I never had to question how I got there. I only questioned anyone who didn't look like me trying to join me." She paused, then added, "I think that's what scared me most about you. You didn't ask for permission." Tasha listened, neither interrupting nor dismissing. Meredith stepped back, not waiting for absolution, but relieved simply to have spoken it aloud. In the weeks that followed, she continued volunteering, but with a different purpose. She signed up for workshops on racial bias and systemic equity. She enrolled in evening classes for ethics in leadership. She wrote essays, not for publication, but for clarity. And when the director of a local startup incubator reached out for DI training support, Meredith volunteered to help build their framework pro bono. Her journey, like so many others at the company, was not a redemption arc wrapped in applause. It was quiet, slow, earned. Jonah, the intern who had uncovered the zip code bias, was now a junior analyst at a nonprofit watchdog group focused on AI and hiring discrimination. Riley, once afraid to speak up, now worked with that same group, developing internal protocols that flagged bias at the code level. Their names didn't make headlines, but their work changed policy from the inside out. Langford and Hawthorne's rebuilt hiring system, now stripped of its old algorithms, featured a candidate review process led by a rotating, diverse panel. Tasha's guidelines were implemented in every region. More than 40 previously rejected applicants had since been contacted, re-interviewed, and hired into the roles they had once been denied. But beyond those metrics, the story took on a life of its own. It was shared in classrooms, discussed in corporate training halls, cited in HR journals. One photo, taken at that Crestview event, captured the quiet moment when Meredith and Tasha stood side by side, not smiling, not posing, but simply acknowledging one another. That image was reposted thousands of times under a single caption: "Justice is not revenge, it's recognition." As for Tasha, she remained unchanged in her essence, sharp, composed, undeterred. But something in her posture had softened. She continued to consult, to write, to mentor, but she also returned often to Crestview, not as an executive, not as a monitor, but as a daughter of the very community that had shaped her strength. She funded scholarships for girls who wanted to study law. She built a reading lab in her late mother's name. She hosted forums, not on diversity, but on dignity. When asked why she kept showing up in person, why she still poured energy into places the world once overlooked, she said simply, "Because I wasn't just fighting a company. I was fighting an idea. And ideas don't disappear when the headlines fade." One day, as she stood beneath the mural in the new tech lab, her name painted quietly along the bottom edge, she overheard a young girl ask her mother, "Is that the lady who made the bad people lose?" The mother smiled and answered, "No, that's the lady who helped them change." In that answer lived everything. Because, in the end, the story hadn't just been about power or punishment. It had been about sight. About what happens when someone sees the truth and doesn't turn away. About what follows when those who once stood behind closed doors finally open them, and then hold them open for others. The end. If this story moved you, if the twist caught you off guard or the ending made you think differently, don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful narratives like this. Which part hit you the hardest? Was it the moment she revealed her true identity, or the final scene where change truly began? Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. Your voice matters here.